One of the most important things that I talk about now is recovery, and I don't think it's talked about enough. I think we talk about mental illness really well actually now in the UK. I think we're really getting that conversation going, and things like this podcast are just brilliant to get out there and to have these very candid conversations. But I think we do need to reassure women, reassure people who are experiencing mental illness that for many illnesses, as a physical illness, recovery is possible. And I think sometimes there's this stigma that if you are mentally ill, you're going to be mentally ill forever. And that's not always the case. And I think it's important to discuss that and to talk about that as much as we do the illness side, really. Yeah. There is a light at the end of the tunnel.
Hello, I'm Sheri Jacobson, and this is TherapyLab, a podcast dedicated to therapy, thought, and the art of mental well-being. In this episode, we are joined by the founder of the Motherload, the largest parenting group for women, Kate Dyson, to talk about her experiences with postnatal depression and how therapy has informed her work. Hello, Kate.
Hi.
Thank you very much for joining us today.
It's a pleasure.
Can we start off with a well-being check-in? How are you today on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being the lowest, 10 being the highest?
I'd say I am a 9 today, actually. Yeah.
Anything in particular behind that?
I'm feeling really good at the moment. My baby is 9 weeks old and he slept through last night. So I am definitely feeling, a lot better at the moment.
I wonder if you can tell us a little bit about your work. What are you working on currently? Apart from mummying, which of course is
the main
work. It is the bulk of it.
Absolutely.
You can talk about that as well.
So I am the founder of the Motherload community and website, and essentially what that means is that we run a parenting community for women. I started it with just 8 of my friends. It was supposed to just be a small chat group for us to talk about motherhood in a very candid way. And it's now 78,000 women join us every day and talk about motherhood, from their experiences to seeking advice to finding support through the highs and lows. And of course there are a lot of highs and lows with motherhood. And some of that is mental health related, and a lot of it is very funny and it's very light-hearted, but we really deal with the difficult issues as well that surround parenting and dilemmas and things like that. So that's what I do on a day-to-day basis, and it takes up a lot of time, but I'm very, very proud of it and very proud of the community we've created.
How did you evolve from the 8 to what it is today?
It was really organic. I didn't ever intend to run an enormous community. It really was that I just wanted a space to be able to talk honestly about my motherhood experience. And I did find that a lot of the forums at the time were judgmental, and if you talked very candidly, which, bear in mind, I wasn't very well at the time, so I did kind of need this more honest space. I did find that I was judged, and this sort of wall of criticism came back. And so I created the group in the middle of the night during a night feed with my middle child, Maggie, to just have that space with people that I trusted to say, wow, there are times when this is really hard, and there are times when I don't really like being a mom. And yeah, so we grew it really through just inviting friends. More friends joined us quite quickly, and by the first 6 months it was 1,000. The following Christmas it was 16,000, sorry, and then 32, and it's just kept on rolling ever since. And yeah, we're now at 78. So it's been quite a ride, and I never intended to do it like this. I never sort of thought I'd run a huge community for women like this, but it's been like a huge achievement, actually. Yeah.
So what is your involvement with it now? What are the kind of the day-to-day roles that you play within managing the community?
There's all sorts of things, really. It's really varied. So everything from really just moderating and administrating the group.
And you do that?
Yeah, I have an amazing team that I do that with.
Yeah.
And then we also work with some women away from the main timeline. Their posts may be extremely vulnerable or very sensitive. They may be legally active. There may be a number of reasons why really it's not appropriate for them to post on the group. And we signpost then to relevant resources or people who can really help and who have more experience and professional knowledge than we do or really anyone on the group will. And that might be for domestic violence, that might be for mental illness, that might be, we've had some women sadly who are quite close to having suicidal thoughts and things like that. So we are very careful. And that actually takes up a surprising amount of time in such a large group that maybe won't surprise you too much, but yeah, it does. And then there's another side, which is the more business side, I guess, which is working with brands. We need to make the group work, so it can continue to run. And so we work with some
commercially.
Brands and have a commercial arm to it that we create content for and present commercial projects to our members. But we always make sure that we do that with we always do that with I want to say ethically minded. That we need to make sure that it's appropriate and it's relevant, and our members are going to benefit in some way from that work. Especially when we do have vulnerable members. But yeah.
Let me ask you, what kind of percentage of the content relates to mental health issues, would you say?
I would say because the group really was created because of my own experience. It is always there. It's always there at the heart of what we do and the core of what we're doing. And although we want to sort of really embrace that light-hearted side of motherhood, and we have so many fantastic, very funny posts, that we say is from the coalface of parenting and hacks and things like that. I think mental health is such an important thing for mums, and it's something that we don't talk about enough perhaps between each other, and we don't always recognise in ourselves when we're poorly. And sometimes talking about your own experience can mean that someone out there is reading it or is watching a live that I've done or whatever and say, I recognise that in myself and I think I need to go and get checked. I would certainly hope that's the benefit of what we're doing. And so I have written about my own experience quite a lot, and I've talked about it enormously on the group. And so I'd say probably about 30% of our content has been mental health related at some point. And it's a really important part of, what we sort of discuss on the group as a regular basis in terms of posts that we have submitted. So yeah, it's definitely at the heart. It's the heartbeat of what the Motherload's about, really.
And are you okay to share some of your experiences of what led you to create the group and what you went through in particular?
Absolutely. So I with my firstborn, Bess, I had a traumatic birth, and the effects of that wasn't really picked up for quite some time, but I knew that I hadn't bonded with her, and I felt this overwhelming desire to protect her, but that flood of love, that bond, that instinct in terms of feeling very attached to her didn't really come. And I used to say this thing, like if someone had knocked on the door and said, we're here to take Bess back now to her real parents, I think I would have been quite, okay, I've had a great time, thanks very much. I just didn't have that maternal thing. And it played in the back of my mind. I wouldn't say I was particularly poorly overwhelmingly at that point. But I knew I wasn't well, and I knew that that wasn't the right thing to be thinking. And I felt that for quite some time until she was just under a year old, and I was waiting in a cafe for my husband to join us, who was my fiance at the time, and she was asleep. And I'd never really, I'd heard mums, and I actually now get it, but I'd heard mums say, when they're sleeping, I miss them. And I never got that. I was really glad when she went to sleep. I was really grateful for the break. I found it very overwhelming, I guess, in that sense, just very demanding. And she was asleep in her pram, and as I was drinking my coffee, her eyes flushed, and she started to wake up as I checked on her. And she just gave me this huge beaming smile, and it was like this tsunami of love just overwhelmed me, and this pride that this beautiful baby was mine, and this connection came. And I kind of then sort of started to gradually get, I think it's easier after a year anyway, they start to become little people a bit more, and they're more independent from you rather than that immediate, like, constant clinging need, if you like. It started to get a lot easier. And then we decided to have another baby. And while I was pregnant with Maggie, it was like a perfect storm. There was things going on at work, but there was also this growing, overwhelming fear of the birth that started to creep up on me. And my consultant wouldn't confirm the C-section that I'd requested until very late into the pregnancy. I think I had to be 34 weeks before they would have that chat with me. And I needed that discussion really early on. I needed that decision to sort of make me be reassured that it wasn't going to be the same experience again. As it happened, I ended up having antenatal depression as a result of this perfect storm of the work pressure and the stress that came at that time anyway, external to the pregnancy, but then also this fear that was growing into insomnia and flashbacks and all sorts of things that were just increasing. So I went to go and speak to a psychotherapist at the time, through the hospital that they referred me to, and I didn't have medication. I rejected medication because I didn't want to take medication while pregnant, which I now know may have helped more. And Maggie was born through the C-section that I needed, and the birth was very different. But then gradually, because I think these issues had not been dealt with, she was a bad sleeper, and I just gradually fell further and further into anxiety and post-traumatic stress disorder and postnatal depression. And I had this huge ball. It was like a snowball effect then over the next 3 years, where that just grew and grew and became more intense. And eventually I was very poorly indeed.
And you had therapy before, but not during this period of time?
No, so I kept going back to the doctors, really upon the insistence of my husband and my mum by now, and you've got to talk to someone about how you're feeling. And so I'd go back, and unfortunately the care that I was getting at the time wasn't great. I'm a huge fan of the NHS. I think it's the most wonderful thing in the UK that we have, but it failed me initially, for sure, at that frontline level, when I was going to the GP, and no one really picked up. I think one of the biggest issues we have is having to go back and talk to someone different and restart that whole story again. And eventually I checked out of that, and I couldn't face going back to restart that story of why I was here and why I needed more help and why I needed to maybe check on this medication and that medication. And I didn't like the way the medication made me feel. So without the lack of support really to take that and to be making sure that I had the right medication for me, I sort of checked out of the process a little bit. And of course that's the worst thing you can do, because you become more ill. You don't get better by yourself when you're in it that deep. And the anxiety was really high by then. I was having panic attacks daily. My anxiety levels were high all the time. I couldn't really cope with just general day-to-day stuff. I started to get traits of OCD coming in, where I would manically tidy the house, have friends over, push myself to the absolute limit, invite loads of friends for coffee and their babies, feel stressed the entire time they were there. But I needed people to think I was okay and I was well and I was better. Yeah. It was a really hectic and exhausting time, to be honest.
So you were experiencing a number of different symptoms at the same time.
Yeah.
So not only sort of symptoms of depression, but also anxiety coexisting.
Very much so.
And then for you, one of the, it sounds like one of the more helpful outlets was creating the community Motherload. Was that kind of your attempt at building up a support system that was valuable for you?
Yeah, without a doubt. I think one of the things that we don't really talk about is it's really hard to leave the house, not only when you're depressed, but when you have a baby to deal with as well. That almost seems like a completely insurmountable matter. You just cannot get over that. The idea of just getting yourself dressed is huge. Getting a child out as well, a child out of the house, and seeking help or meeting friends or doing something that is going to make you feel healthier, it's just nigh on impossible. And definitely creating something in my phone where I didn't have to go out, but I could still talk to people and connect to other mums and connect to the way that other people were very honestly talking back to me. And it wasn't this idea of like, oh no, you know, I'm doing really great. You know, there were these women around me were also able to talk candidly about how they were finding motherhood, and that wasn't always this rose-tinted, Instagram filtered amazing experience either. It was, we were all in the trenches at that point of
And then how do the conversations work? So are there kind of like topics and forums, and do you interact with the same members on a regular basis?
So I suppose my role now is really sort of mediating the forum, and it's less about me diving in any longer. And that's really been a natural sort of progression as the community's grown. It's really hard to be both in a community.
Yeah, but for someone who's joining it at this point in time, what could they expect, and how could they use the community to help with difficulties that they're going through?
So they would submit a post about how they feel, and then the team will pick that up and will either approve it for the timeline, or like I was saying before, we work, you know, away from the timeline with them on private messages and ensuring that they're okay in that way. But on the timeline, on the news feeds, they would submit their posts, and then they would get this tsunami of love from, you know, this huge community of mums who get it and are ready to support and be kind and welcome them with open arms and show them that they're not alone, really. And they just respond with their own experiences, with loads of advice, with, you know, the odd wry smile and, you know, that don't worry that my kid's done this and it's 10 times worse this morning, you know. We get a lot of posts which are just, I'm finding today it's so hard. And I think just saying that sometimes is so important. Just getting that out actually can clear that fog a little bit. And yeah, we also get posts if I'm not very well, you know, and I need help. I really need help now. And then the community's there in a different way.
And obviously, you know, coming from a tradition of like working individually with clients one-on-one, it's very, very different from a group experience, particularly one that's online as well. But that doesn't make it any less powerful than than the kind of the one-to-one attention that happens in face-to-face work. But I also noticed that the same kind of mechanism, the same thing that's really a driver to change is at work in both mechanisms, which is a depth of care and I think an affection. So like the sort of connection that you have, except it's not one-to-one, it's one-to-many in a way. And that, I presume, for most users is very felt.
Yeah, definitely. I think peer support has a really important part to play in therapy. And, I've had one-to-one therapy, and it was the thing that enabled my recovery, much more than medication. It was a really important part of my recovery. And I think the peer support also, just knowing that you're not alone and knowing that there is this wider world out there where many, many women may be feeling the way that you feel. It can be really important because depression and mental illness can be so isolating, physically and mentally. How many times we sort of just retreat into ourselves and block important people out who can really help. And I think having that online support can really help women who can't relay how they're feeling to maybe their husband or their partner or their parents or their best friends. They're finding it hard to sort of say, I don't think I'm well at the moment. Whereas actually it's easy to sometimes say that to a stranger or from behind a keyboard. So I think we have a really important part to play, but I think we have to be responsible in it. And that's why we work with some women away from the timeline, because they may be so vulnerable that actually online support isn't a great idea. That faceless community isn't always the right thing for everyone. And recognising that is an important part of our job, really. And making sure that they're signposted to the right support is really important.
And if I understand correctly, you don't allow discussions on medication in the community.
No.
What's the reason behind that?
So I get why many people will try and post online about their medication, but for me the most worrying thing is that as a result of some of the advice they get, they may cease to take their medication. And when we're talking about varying degrees of mental health, it's not always that someone is feeling a bit blue and a little bit depressed, and so have been given like a first line antidepressant or whatever. It may be that they're in psychosis. It might be that they have bipolar or illnesses that really do need a lot more responsible thinking, especially when it comes to medication. And my concern is that if someone is in an episode and they post and they receive advice to maybe, oh no, I took that and I had this side effect, then it may stop them taking medication. Yeah. So we just stop all of that right at the door. We don't allow it. And I understand that, for some, they may feel like I need to just find out if this is a normal side effect. But really, that's what your therapist is there for. That's what your doctor is there for. And those are discussions that really need to happen between those professionals and find a medication that works for you as opposed to what's worked for someone else online.
Yeah. And then let's go back to you. How do you navigate your issues, which I assume will ebb and flow over the course of time? What do you do to try and manage your well-being?
I think in therapy, the most important thing for me was learning those mechanisms. So even things from like counting backwards or from just.
So give me an example of that. When would you use that? When would the need for that arise?
I don't experience anxiety in the way that I did, but definitely at times when I can feel that slight creeping anxiety coming back in, because we all get anxious from time to time. Of course we do, but for me it's just knowing that that heart racing, that kind of tight feeling. And that's a time when I will sit down and take a moment where I need to refocus myself. I need that logical part of my brain to take over and not allow that emotional side to creep up and dominate. And so I will count backwards then, or I'll spell out words, really long words. What's the longest thing I can find in the room? Wardrobe, and then do that backwards, because it just completely resets me, and it works really well for me. I think, I've recently discovered apps on my phone for meditating, and I've found those really important.
Any ones in particular helping you now?
Headspace I find really good. I actually use them with my children as well now. My middle daughter is very emotional, and she's benefiting from that kind of thing as well. I had this thing in therapy where I recognise that some of those mechanisms that I can kind of use, like sort of projecting into the future a little bit and sort of talking to my current self, my present self, if you like, and saying this is going to be okay. You don't freak out now, because it is going to be all right. Just take a breath. This is what it's going to look like. You've just got to get there. Was like taking the pill. So, I did struggle with mentally taking medication. For me, it was a really big thing. No one in my family had ever taken medication for mental health. And I wouldn't say I was totally opposed by it, but one psychiatrist did write anti-medication in my notes. And it's not that I don't see why that's beneficial. It's that for me, personally, I just found it a hurdle to take it. But interestingly, in the talking therapies, I was able to use those mechanisms to take a pill, if that makes sense, and to make that process much easier. So there are that, and also I think we hear this phrase self-care, and it's bandied around on Instagram like nobody's business, and it's almost become like a cringe factor, but it's so important to take a moment, especially as a mom, that you take that moment to care for yourself and to reset and fill that cup back up.
And anything that you're doing currently to work on self-care, anything? And we started off talking about sleep and having a good night's sleep, but that's not always in your control as a mother.
No, but I am very lucky that my partner's work means, or my husband's work means, that I can rest in the afternoon. So I do rest, and I see the importance of resting now, whereas before I was just like, no, it's time to get things done. It's not. It's time to allow my head to settle, really. But also I do things like go for a really long bath, and that is an indulgence, but it's an indulgence that I need. It's not a huge thing. I do it a couple of times a week where I go for a long bath, but it just gives me time to completely rest my mind. And also meditating with apps, that you can do that in 3 minutes. But those are the things that I do for me in terms of self-care. And also just understanding the importance of me and the importance of, filling my cup and ensuring that I am as healthy as I can be. Because when I'm not, it's not just me that suffers, it's my family suffering, my children are suffering, my wider family are very worried and concerned. It's important that I am well. For many reasons. Yeah,
and particularly when you're caregiving to so many people around you, not only your children, but also your community.
Yeah, absolutely.
As well.
Yeah, definitely.
Do you have any parting comments for anyone who's listening who is struggling with post-anti or postnatal depression currently?
I think one of the most important things that I talk about now is recovery, and I don't think it's talked about enough. I think we talk about mental illness really well actually now in the UK. I think we're really getting that conversation going, and things like this podcast are just brilliant to get out there and to have these very candid conversations. And we talk about treatment an awful lot, but we don't really talk about what recovery looks like and how recovery can be. It can take a long time to get to recovery. You're not going to take a pill necessarily and just then feel better. You're not going to have a couple of sessions with a therapist and suddenly feel better. This is an important ongoing process where you look after yourself and you look after your mind as much as you do your body, whether that's through exercise, whether that's through taking medication, whether that's through self-care elements, whether that's through meditation or whatever. But I think we do need to reassure women, reassure people who are experiencing mental illness that for many illnesses, as a physical illness, recovery is possible. And I think sometimes there's this stigma that if you are mentally ill, you're going to be mentally ill forever. And that's not always the case. And I think it's important to discuss that and to talk about that as much as we do the illness side, really. Yeah. There is a light at the end of the tunnel.
There is, and what better platform in order to be able to join in the conversation and relate to others in similar camp than the Motherload. Where can people access it?
They can find us on Facebook, the biggest, that's the side to find us for the community. And you can also find us on our website, which is www.the-motherload.co.uk.
Very good. Thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it, Kate. If you feel you'd benefit from therapy and want to transform your life, HarleyTherapy.com is here to help you book counselling with qualified professional therapists online or in person at times and prices that suit you wherever you are in the world. If this is your first listen to Therapy Lab, do hit subscribe to keep up to date with new episodes. You can find us on iTunes, Spotify, and listen at HarleyTherapy.com/TherapyLab. We'll see you next time.